Welcome to CuriosityTube, your daily dose of information. Hey, remember that time Venezuela was an economic powerhouse? No? Well, neither does anyone else because it didn't last very long. For a hot minute back in the mid-2000s, Venezuela was riding high on the hog, flush with cash from sky-high oil prices. They were throwing money at social programs like it was going out of style. Life was good, at least for a little while. But then, like a bad hangover after a tequila bender, it all came crashing down. Fast forward to today, and Venezuela is a cautionary tale of economic mismanagement on an epic scale. We're talking hyperinflation, food shortages, and people fleeing the country in droves. So how did Venezuela go from top dog to economic underdog so quickly? Well, buckle up because we're about to dive headfirst into the dumpster fire that is Venezuela's recent economic history. It's a wild ride, folks, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. To understand how Venezuela went so wrong, you gotta understand a little something about its past. See, Venezuela's got this stuff called oil, and not just a little bit, we're talking buttloads of the black gold, enough to make them one of the world's largest oil producers. Now you'd think sitting on top of a giant pool of money would make a country rich and happy, right? Well, not so fast. Venezuela's history is also riddled with political instability, corruption, and inequality. Think of it like winning the lottery and then immediately getting scammed by your entire family. For decades, Venezuela was ruled by a series of corrupt governments, all too happy to line their pockets with oil money, while the majority of the population struggled. This created a powder keg of resentment and anger, just waiting for the right spark to ignite it. And boy, did that spark come along. Enter Hugo Chávez, a charismatic former military officer who promised to shake things up and redistribute the country's wealth to the poor. In 1998, he rode a wave of popular discontent all the way to the presidential palace. Chávez wasn't your average politician. He was loud, he was brash, and he hated the United States with a fiery passion. He also had a knack for connecting with Venezuela's poor and working class, promising them a better life and a fairer share of the country's oil wealth. And for a while, he actually delivered. Chávez used the massive influx of cash from soaring oil prices to fund social programs like crazy. We're talking free healthcare, education, and subsidized food, all funded by that sweet, sweet oil money. It was a party, and everyone was invited. But like all good parties, this one couldn't last forever. Now let's talk about oil. In the early 2000s, the price of oil went through the roof. Remember those $4 a gallon gas prices that made you want to set your car on fire? Yeah, that was this time. For oil-rich countries like Venezuela, it was like winning the lottery. Every barrel they pulled out of the ground was worth a small fortune. Chávez was swimming in cash and he wasn't afraid to spend it. He poured money into social programs, infrastructure projects, and even started giving away cheap oil to other countries to win friends and influence people. Venezuela was the belle of the ball, and Chávez was the life of the party. But here's the thing about booms, they inevitably lead to busts. And when the music stopped, Venezuela was left holding a whole lot of empty bottles and a pounding headache. Chávez used the oil windfall to fund a whole bunch of social programs, collectively known as misiones. These programs provided everything from free healthcare and education to subsidized food and housing. Now on the surface, this sounds pretty great, right? Who doesn't love free stuff? And there's no denying that these programs did help lift millions of Venezuelans out of poverty. For the first time in their lives, many people had access to basic necessities and opportunities they could only dream of before. But there was a catch, a big one. These programs were almost entirely funded by oil revenue. They were like a giant house of cards built on a foundation of crude oil, and when the price of oil inevitably dropped, the whole thing was going to come crashing down. But hey, let's not worry about that now. Let's just enjoy the party while it lasts, right? Remember that whole "don't put all your eggs in one basket" thing your grandma used to say? Well, Venezuela apparently missed that memo. They went all in on oil, neglecting other industries and becoming completely dependent on those black gold exports. This was a problem for a couple of reasons. First, it made Venezuela incredibly vulnerable to fluctuations in the global oil market. When prices were high, everything was great. But when prices dropped, the economy went into a tailspin. Second, it discouraged investment in other sectors of the economy. Why bother building factories or developing new industries when you can just suck oil out of the ground and make a fortune? Chávez wasn't just content with spending oil money, he also wanted to nationalize key industries. He argued that this would give the government more control over the economy and allow them to distribute wealth more fairly. So, he started seizing private companies left and right, from oil fields and telecommunications companies to supermarkets and coffee producers. The problem was, the government had no idea how to run these businesses efficiently. Instead of boosting the economy, nationalization led to shortages, inefficiency, and corruption. It turned out that government bureaucrats weren't exactly the best people to run a business. Just when you thought things couldn't get any worse for Venezuela, the global financial crisis of 2008 hit. The world economy went into a tailspin and demand for oil plummeted. Remember that whole Venezuela is completely dependent on oil thing? Yeah, this is where it really comes back to bite them. With oil prices in the toilet, Venezuela's economy went into freefall. The government had blown through its massive oil savings during the good times, so they had no cushion to soften the blow. They tried to keep the party going by printing more money, but that just led to hyperinflation, and unfortunately things were about to get a whole lot worse. When Chávez died in 2013, his hand-picked successor, Nicolas Maduro, took over. Maduro was basically Chávez 2.0, but without the charisma or popular support. He doubled down on all of Chávez's disastrous policies, and the Venezuelan economy went from bad to worse to how is this even possible? Hyperinflation spiraled out of control, food and medicine became scarce, and people started fleeing the country in droves. The situation became so dire that Venezuela, once one of the richest countries in South America, became synonymous with economic collapse and humanitarian crisis. It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck, except you're strapped to the tracks, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So what can we learn from Venezuela's epic economic meltdown? Well, for starters, don't put all your eggs in one basket, especially if that basket is filled with a volatile commodity like oil. Diversify your economy, invest in education and infrastructure, and don't rely on a single source of income. Second, be wary of politicians who promise you the moon and the stars. They're usually just trying to buy your vote with empty promises. Look for leaders who have a solid plan for economic growth and sustainability, not just short-term handouts. And finally, remember that socialism isn't a magic bullet. It can work in some cases, but it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. If it's not implemented carefully and responsibly, it can lead to just as much corruption, inefficiency, and economic disaster as any other system. Hope for a brighter future? Venezuela's story is a tragedy, a cautionary tale of how quickly prosperity can turn to poverty when economic policies are driven by ideology and short-term gain. But even in the darkest of times, there's always hope. The Venezuelan people are resilient, and they deserve a better future. It's up to their leaders to learn from the mistakes of the past, implement sound economic policies, and work towards a more prosperous and equitable future for all Venezuelans. Let's hope that one day, Venezuela's story will no longer be a cautionary tale, but a beacon of hope and inspiration for other nations struggling to overcome economic adversity.